Sarah Mitchell adjusted her rearview mirror as she pulled into the parking lot of her daughter Emma's dance studio. The successful CEO of a tech company rarely had time for these afternoon pickups, but today felt different. She had promised Emma she would personally drive her to the birthday party across town, and Sarah never broke promises to her 8-year-old daughter. Emma bounded out of the studio building, her pink backpack bouncing against her small frame. Her face lit up when she saw her mother behind the wheel instead of their usual driver. "Mom, you actually came," she squealed, climbing into the back seat and buckling her seatbelt with practiced ease. "Of course I did, sweetheart," Sarah smiled, watching Emma through the mirror. Ready for Sophia's party? The drive would take them through the winding roads of Pine Valley, past the old industrial district that was slowly being converted into trendy lofts and cafes. As they drove, Emma chattered excitedly about her day, her dance recital next week, and how she hoped Sophia's party would have chocolate cake. Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. Running a company meant constant pressure, endless meetings, and decisions that affected hundreds of employees. But moments like these reminded her what truly mattered. The afternoon, sun filtered through the trees lining Mountain View Road. Sarah had taken this road hundreds of times during her own childhood, when her family lived in this area. The familiar curves and hills brought back memories of simpler times, before board meetings and quarterly reports dominated her life. "Mom, can we stop at the flower shop? I want to get Sophia some flowers," Emma asked, pressing her face against the window as they passed the small strip of shops. "That's very thoughtful of you, Em," Sarah replied, already slowing down. She pulled into the parking space in front of Miller's flower shop, the same place where she used to buy flowers with her own mother decades ago. Some things never changed in small towns. Emma carefully selected a small bouquet of pink roses while Sarah watched with pride. Her daughter had inherited her grandmother's kind heart and attention to detail. As they walked back to the car, Sarah noticed how the late afternoon light caught in Emma's hair, making her look older than her years. Back in the car, Emma held the flowers carefully in her lap, making sure not to crush the delicate petals. "Do you think Sophia will like them?" she asked, looking up at her mother with hopeful eyes. "She'll love them because they come from you," Sarah assured her, starting the engine. They had about 15 minutes before the party started, plenty of time to make the remaining drive through the valley. She pulled out of the parking space and back onto Mountain View Road, neither of them aware that their lives were about to change forever. The road ahead curved gently downward, following the natural contours of the hillside. Sarah had driven this stretch countless times, but today something felt different about the way the car was handling. She pressed the gas pedal to maintain speed up the next incline, but the engine seemed to hesitate for just a moment before responding. The first sign of trouble came as a strange smell drifting through the air conditioning vents. Sarah frowned, thinking maybe someone was burning leaves nearby, but the acrid scent was getting stronger. She glanced at the dashboard, checking for warning lights, but everything appeared normal. "Mom, what's that smell?" Emma asked, wrinkling her nose and looking around the car with concern. "I'm not sure, honey. Probably just someone's barbecue," Sarah replied, though unease was beginning to settle in her stomach. The smell was definitely not barbecue. It was sharp, chemical, and getting more intense by the second. As they crested the hill, Sarah saw the long stretch of road ahead that would take them down into the valley where the party was being held. She pressed the accelerator, and that's when she felt it. A slight shudder in the engine, followed by a sound that made her heart skip a beat. A soft popping noise came from under the hood, almost like popcorn but more menacing. The temperature gauge suddenly spiked into the red zone, and several warning lights began flashing on the dashboard. Sarah's business training kicked in immediately. Assess the situation, prioritize safety, take action. She needed to get off the road as quickly as possible. "Emma, we're going to pull over for a minute, okay?" Sarah kept her voice calm and steady, not wanting to frighten her daughter. She spotted a wide shoulder ahead where the road curved, a safe distance from traffic. But as she began to slow down, she noticed smoke starting to seep from under the edges of the hood. Not the white steam of overheated coolant, but dark, ominous smoke that carried the smell of burning plastic and metal. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she guided the car toward the shoulder. The moment they stopped, Sarah could see orange flickers dancing beneath the hood. Her CEO instincts screamed danger, but her mother's instincts screamed louder. She needed to get Emma out of this car immediately. "Emma, unbuckle your seatbelt right now," Sarah commanded, her voice sharp with urgency as she threw the car into park and turned off the ignition. She pressed the button to unlock all the doors and grabbed her purse, ready to jump out and help her daughter. But when Sarah tried to open her door, it wouldn't budge. She pulled the handle again, pushing with her shoulder, but nothing happened. The electronic locks had engaged automatically when she turned off the car, and now they seemed to be malfunctioning. Panic began to rise in her throat like bile. "Mom, my door won't open either." Emma's voice was higher now, tinged with fear as she struggled with her door handle. The child's safety locks were engaged, meaning Emma couldn't open her door from the inside even if the electronics were working properly. Smoke was now pouring from under the hood in thick, dark clouds. Through the windshield, Sarah could see small flames licking at the edges where the hood met the front fenders. The fire was spreading faster than she had ever imagined possible, and they were trapped inside what was rapidly becoming a metal coffin. Sarah tried her door again, this time throwing her full weight against it while pulling the handle. Nothing. The heat was building inside the car now, and both she and Emma were beginning to sweat. The acrid smoke was finding its way into the passenger compartment, making them both cough. Sarah's mind raced through every possible solution. The windows were electric, and with the car's electrical system clearly malfunctioning, the window buttons weren't responding. She looked around desperately for something to break the glass. Her high heel, her phone, anything that might work as a tool. "Mom, I'm scared," Emma whispered, clutching her bouquet of flowers tighter. Tears were starting to stream down her face, and she was coughing more frequently as smoke continued to seep into the car. "It's going to be okay, baby. Mommy's going to get us out," Sarah promised, though she wasn't sure how. She tried the ignition again, hoping to restore power to the door locks, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The fire had likely damaged critical electrical components. The flames were now visible through the windshield, dancing higher and spreading along the front of the car. The heat inside was becoming unbearable, and both Sarah and Emma were sweating profusely. Sarah pulled off her business jacket and used it to cover Emma's face, helping her breathe through the fabric. In her purse, Sarah found her phone and immediately dialed 911. "This is Sarah Mitchell. My daughter and I are trapped inside a burning car on Mountain View Road, about 2 miles from the Miller's shopping center. The doors won't open and the fire is spreading fast. Please send help immediately." The dispatcher's calm voice came through the speaker. "Help is on the way, Mrs. Mitchell. Fire trucks and paramedics are being dispatched to your location. Can you see any way to break the windows?" Sarah looked around frantically. Her phone wasn't heavy enough. Her shoes were leather with soft heels, and there was nothing else in the car that seemed capable of breaking safety glass. "I don't have anything strong enough," she replied, her voice beginning to crack with desperation. Through the rear window, Sarah could see that no other cars were coming down the road. They were in a relatively remote section between neighborhoods, and traffic was light in the late afternoon. The realization that help might not arrive in time began to sink in. Emma was coughing more now, and her breathing was becoming labored. The smoke was getting thicker inside the car despite Sarah's efforts to keep it out. She moved to the back seat and pulled Emma close, using her own body to shield her daughter from the worst of the heat and smoke. "Tell me about Sophia's party," Sarah said, trying to keep Emma's mind off their situation. "What games do you think she'll have?" Emma tried to answer, but her voice was weak. Maybe pin the tail on the donkey," she managed between coughs. "And musical chairs. I hope she has musical chairs." The flames were now licking at the base of the windshield, and Sarah could hear the crackling and popping of burning plastic and metal. The car's interior temperature was rising rapidly, and she knew they didn't have much time left. Where was the fire department? Where was anyone? That's when she heard it, the sound of a car approaching from behind. Sarah twisted around to look through the rear window and saw a pickup truck slowing down. Relief flooded through her as she realized someone had seen their predicament. She began waving frantically, using her jacket to make herself more visible through the smoke. The pickup truck pulled over about 20 feet behind their burning car, and Sarah watched as a man jumped out of the driver's seat. He was tall and lean, wearing work clothes and a baseball cap, with the quick, purposeful movements of someone accustomed to emergencies. What caught Sarah's attention immediately was the large German shepherd that leaped out of the truck after him. The man's name was Jake Rodriguez, though Sarah didn't know this yet. He was a local contractor who had been driving home from a job site when he spotted the smoke and flames ahead. Jake had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat engineer, and his instincts for crisis situations were still sharp after 10 years of civilian life. "The doors are locked and we can't get out," Sarah shouted through the window, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. Jake immediately assessed the situation. The fire had spread across most of the engine compartment and was starting to reach the passenger cabin. He had maybe 3 or 4 minutes before the situation became unsurvivable. Jake's dog, a 3-year-old German Shepherd named Duke, began barking urgently and pacing around the burning car. The dog had been trained as a search and rescue animal before Jake adopted him from a military working dog program, and Duke's instincts were telling him that people were in danger. "Stand back from the windows," Jake shouted, running to his truck to grab his emergency kit. Every contractor's truck carried basic safety equipment, and Jake was no exception. He pulled out a small emergency hammer designed specifically for breaking car windows, along with a heavy-duty flashlight and a first aid kit. But when Jake returned to the car, he realized the window-breaking hammer wasn't going to work. The flames had created tremendous heat that was causing the car's frame to warp slightly, putting additional pressure on the windows and doors. The safety glass was designed to be extremely difficult to break from the outside. Emma was barely conscious now, slumped against her mother in the back seat. Sarah's eyes were streaming tears from the smoke and she was struggling to breathe. "Please help us," she gasped, pressing her hand against the window where Jake stood. Jake looked at his dog, and an idea formed. During Duke's military training, the dog had been taught to retrieve specific objects on command, including tools and equipment. More importantly, Duke had been trained to break through barriers when necessary during search and rescue operations. "Duke, emergency position," Jake commanded. The German Shepherd immediately understood, positioning himself near the rear passenger window where Emma was barely visible through the smoke. The dog began pawing at the ground and whining, his training telling him to find a way to reach the people who needed help. Jake grabbed a large rock from the roadside and began striking the driver's side window with all his strength, trying to create a weak point in the glass. The first few strikes barely left a mark, but he kept hammering, knowing that every second counted. Meanwhile, Duke seemed to understand that conventional methods weren't working. The intelligent dog ran back to Jake's truck and began barking at something in the truck bed. Jake looked over and saw Duke standing next to a heavy-duty tire iron that had fallen out of his toolbox. "Good boy, Duke," Jake shouted, abandoning his rock and running to grab the tire iron. This tool was much heavier and had a sharp, pointed end that would concentrate the force of his blows into a smaller area. Back at the car, Jake could see that Sarah had lost consciousness, though she was still holding Emma protectively. The smoke inside was now so thick that he could barely make out their forms. He had one chance to get this right. Jake positioned himself at the rear passenger window, closest to where Emma was sitting. He raised the tire iron above his head and brought it down with every ounce of strength he possessed. The pointed end struck the glass with tremendous force, creating a spiderweb pattern of cracks that spread across the entire window. Duke barked encouragement as Jake struck again, this time at a different angle. The second blow shattered the safety glass completely, but it held together in a web of tiny pieces as it was designed to do. Jake used the flat end of the tire iron to push the entire window inward, creating an opening large enough to reach through. Immediately, thick black smoke poured out of the car through the broken window. Jake could barely see inside, but he reached through and found Emma first. The little girl was unconscious, her small body limp and her breathing shallow. Jake carefully lifted her through the window opening, trying not to cut her on the remaining glass fragments. "Duke, safe position," Jake commanded, and the German Shepherd immediately moved to a spot about 10 feet away from the car where he sat at attention, ready to help guard the child. Jake gently placed Emma on the ground next to Duke, who instinctively moved closer to the girl and began licking her face, trying to revive her. Jake turned back to the car to get Sarah. The flames had now reached the dashboard, and he could feel the intense heat even from outside the vehicle. Sarah was still unconscious in the back seat, and her position made it much more difficult to extract her through the rear window. Working quickly, Jake managed to grab Sarah under her arms and began pulling her toward the window opening. But Sarah was taller and heavier than Emma, and the angle was awkward. Halfway through the extraction, Sarah's legs became tangled with the seatbelt, and Jake couldn't pull her any further. The fire was spreading rapidly now, and Jake could hear the sound of other things beginning to explode under the hood, probably fluid reservoirs and plastic components. He knew the fuel tank could potentially ignite if the fire reached the rear of the car, though modern safety systems made this less likely than in older vehicles. Jake climbed partially through the window himself, putting his upper body inside the burning car to free Sarah's legs from the seatbelt. The heat was incredible, and he could feel his shirt beginning to singe. His eyes were streaming tears from the smoke, and each breath felt like fire in his lungs. Finally, Sarah's legs came free, and Jake was able to pull her completely through the window. He lifted her unconscious form and carried her to where Emma lay next to Duke. Both mother and daughter were breathing, but barely, and both needed immediate medical attention. Duke had been trained in basic first aid assistance, and he was alternating between licking Emma's face and barking in a specific pattern that Jake recognized as the dog's signal for human needs medical help. The German Shepherd's training was proving invaluable in the crisis. In the distance, Jake could finally hear the wail of sirens approaching. The fire department and paramedics were still several minutes away, but help was coming. However, both Sarah and Emma needed immediate attention for smoke inhalation, and Jake's military first aid training kicked in. He checked both of their pulses and breathing, then positioned them on their sides to prevent choking in case they vomited. Emma stirred slightly and began coughing, which was actually a good sign. It meant her body was trying to clear the smoke from her lungs. The car behind them was now completely engulfed in flames, creating an intense heat that forced Jake to move Sarah and Emma further away. Duke helped by gently grasping Emma's jacket in his teeth and pulling, assisting Jake in moving the unconscious child to safety. The fire trucks arrived just as the car's tires began exploding from the heat, sending black rubber debris scattered across the road. 3 emergency vehicles pulled up, 2 fire engines and an ambulance, with their crews jumping into action immediately upon seeing the scene. Jake quickly briefed the paramedics on what had happened while they began examining Sarah and Emma. The woman and little girl were trapped inside for about 8 to 10 minutes before I could get them out. Both were unconscious from smoke inhalation when I extracted them. The child started breathing better about 2 minutes ago. The paramedics worked efficiently, placing oxygen masks over both Sarah's and Emma's faces and checking their vital signs. Emma's eyes fluttered open first, and she began looking around in confusion and fear until she saw Duke sitting nearby, watching her with concerned brown eyes. "The doggy," Emma whispered weakly through her oxygen mask, reaching out a small hand toward Duke. The German Shepherd gently approached and allowed Emma to touch his fur, seeming to understand that his presence was comforting to the frightened child. Sarah regained consciousness a few moments later, immediately trying to sit up and look for her daughter. "Emma, where's Emma?" she called out frantically, her voice hoarse and raw from the smoke. "She's right here, ma'am. She's safe," one of the paramedics assured her, helping Sarah turn her head to see Emma lying nearby with Duke beside her. Tears of relief streamed down Sarah's face as she saw that her daughter was awake and breathing. The fire crew had quickly extinguished the car fire, but the vehicle was a complete loss. The entire front half was blackened and twisted metal, while the passenger compartment showed significant smoke and heat damage. Looking at the wreckage, everyone present understood how close Sarah and Emma had come to a tragic outcome. A police officer approached Jake to get his statement about the rescue. "Sir, can you tell me exactly what happened here?" Officer Martinez asked, pulling out his notepad. Jake recounted the events while Duke sat patiently beside him, occasionally looking over at Emma to make sure she was okay. "I was driving home from a construction site when I saw the smoke. When I realized people were trapped inside, I knew I had to act fast. Duke here helped me figure out how to break the window." Emma was being loaded into the ambulance. When she insisted on saying something to Jake, the paramedic brought her stretcher close to where Jake stood with Duke. "Thank you for saving me and my mommy," she said in a small voice, then looked at Duke. "And thank you too, doggy." Duke's tail wagged slightly, and he gently placed his large head near Emma's small hand so she could pet him one more time. The paramedic smiled at the interaction, understanding that the connection between the child and the rescue dog was helping Emma process the trauma she had just experienced. Sarah was loaded into the same ambulance, and before the doors closed, she managed to catch Jake's eye. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice still rough but filled with emotion. "You saved our lives," Jake nodded modestly. Anyone would have done the same thing. But both he and Sarah knew that wasn't necessarily true. Many people might have called 911 and waited for professional help to arrive, not realizing that every second counted in a situation like this. As the ambulance pulled away with its sirens wailing, Jake stood in the road with Duke beside him, watching the emergency vehicles disappear around the curve. The German Shepherd looked up at his human companion as if to ask, "Did we do good?" At the hospital, doctors treated both Sarah and Emma for smoke inhalation and minor burns. Emma had inhaled less smoke due to her smaller size and the fact that she was lower in the car where the air was slightly cleaner. Sarah's condition was more serious, requiring oxygen therapy and overnight observation, but both were expected to make full recoveries. Emma's first question after being settled in her hospital room was about Duke. "Mommy, can we see the doggy again?" she asked, still clutching the slightly wilted bouquet of flowers that had somehow survived their ordeal. Sarah smiled despite her sore throat and burning lungs. "I think we can arrange that, sweetheart." She had already decided that she needed to find Jake Rodriguez and thank him properly for what he had done. More than that, she wanted to understand what kind of person risks his own life for complete strangers. 2 days later, when both Sarah and Emma were released from the hospital, Sarah used her company's resources to track down Jake. She discovered that he owned a small construction business and lived modestly on the outskirts of town with Duke. When she called him, Jake was surprised to hear from her and insisted that he didn't need any reward or recognition. But Sarah was persistent, and she finally convinced Jake to meet them at a local park so Emma could properly thank Duke. When they arrived, Emma ran straight to the German Shepherd, who remembered her immediately and greeted her with gentle enthusiasm. "I brought you something," Emma told Duke solemnly, pulling a large dog bone from her backpack. Duke accepted the treat graciously, his tail wagging as Emma petted his thick fur. While Emma played with Duke, Sarah talked with Jake about what had happened. She learned about his military background, his decision to adopt Duke from the working dog program, and his quiet dedication to helping others in his community through his construction work and volunteer activities. "I've been thinking about what you did," Sarah told him. "It wasn't just brave. It was the kind of quick thinking and decisive action that saves lives. Have you ever considered that there might be other ways to use those skills?" Jake looked puzzled, so Sarah explained her idea. Her company had been looking for someone to head up their corporate safety and emergency response program. It was a position that would involve training employees, developing emergency procedures, and ensuring that the company was prepared for any crisis that might arise. "I don't have a college degree," Jake said hesitantly. "I'm just a contractor who served in the military." Sarah laughed softly. "Jake, you assessed a life-threatening situation, developed a solution under extreme pressure, and executed a perfect rescue in less than 10 minutes. That's exactly the kind of real-world experience I need. The college degree we can work on if you want, but what you did that day can't be taught in any classroom." Emma looked up from where she was teaching Duke to sit and stay. "Are you going to work with my mommy?" she asked Jake with innocent directness. Jake looked at the little girl whose life he had saved, then at her mother who was offering him an opportunity he had never imagined. "I think maybe I am," he replied, smiling as Duke barked approval. 6 months later, Jake Rodriguez became the Director of Safety and Emergency Response for Mitchell Technologies, with Duke officially registered as the company's therapy and emergency response dog. The position allowed Jake to expand his impact beyond single rescue situations, to create systems that could potentially save many lives. Emma never missed an opportunity to visit Uncle Jake and Duke at her mother's office. She would tell anyone who would listen about how the brave man and his dog saved her and her mommy from the burning car. And every time she told the story, Duke would sit patiently beside her, as if he understood that he had played a special role in bringing their two families together. The incident changed Sarah's perspective on leadership and community. She realized that true heroes often work quietly in everyday jobs, ready to step forward when others need help. Her company began partnering with local veteran organizations and animal rescue groups, creating opportunities for people like Jake and dogs like Duke to continue making a difference in their community. Years later, when Emma was old enough to understand the full gravity of what had happened that day, she would still remember the moment when she saw Jake's face through the car window and knew that everything was going to be okay. Some rescues are performed by firefighters and paramedics, but sometimes ordinary people and their loyal companions become extraordinary heroes when the moment demands it.